My daughter called it an intervention. She sat across from me at my own kitchen table, the one my late wife Carol and I had picked out at a little furniture shop in Orangeville 30 years ago, and she slid a piece of paper across the wood like she was making an offer on a used car. Dad, we just need you to sign this. It's for your own protection. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at her. Then I looked at my son-in-law, Derek, standing by the window with his arms crossed, trying to look like a man who wasn't afraid of me. I am 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a forensic accountant with the Ontario Securities Commission. I have put people in federal prison for document fraud. I know what a power of attorney form looks like, and I know exactly what it means when someone slides one across a table with a pen already uncapped. I smiled at my daughter. Let me read it over, I said. Of course, Dad. She smiled back. Neither of us meant a word of it. That was 4 months before Thanksgiving, before the broken glass, before I texted my lawyer from the driveway with 4 stitches in my hand and typed the 3 words we had agreed on. The door's open. My name is Robert Hale. I live in a gray stone house on the edge of Collingwood, Ontario, on 2 acres of land that backs onto the escarpment. Carol and I built that house the year our daughter Melissa was born. We planted the apple trees in the side yard together, the ones that still produce more fruit than I can ever use. I make cider every October. I have done it alone since Carol passed 3 years ago. Melissa is 38. She is smart, genuinely smart, and she married a man named Derek Pulio who is also smart, in the particular way that people are smart when they have learned how to read a room and say the right things in it. Derek sells commercial real estate in Barrie. He is good at it. He drives a truck that costs more than most people's first homes. I knew something was wrong about 8 months ago when Melissa started calling every day. Not to talk, to check. Just making sure you're okay, Dad. Dad, have you been eating properly? Dad, Margaret next door told me she hasn't seen your car in the driveway. Are you getting out? I had been in Ottawa for a conference. She didn't know that because she had stopped actually listening to what I told her. Then came the questions about my finances, slipped into conversation the way you slip a pill into a dog's food. Dad, do you still have someone managing your investments? Because interest rates, you know. Derek was saying your pension from OSC, is that still the full amount? Are you keeping up with the property taxes? Because I read that a lot of seniors fall behind. I have never fallen behind on anything in my life. I ran fraud investigations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I can manage a property tax bill. But I didn't say that. I said, you're right, it's a lot to keep track of. I said, I appreciate you looking out for me, and I watched their faces to see if they believed it. They did. That was their first mistake. The truth is, I had known for 6 months what they were building toward. My old colleague from OSC, a woman named Frances who now does private financial investigations, had done me a quiet favor. She found the paper trail. Derek's commercial portfolio had collapsed in the rate hikes. 3 properties, all leveraged, all underwater. He was carrying close to $400,000 in personal guarantees on loans that were coming due before the end of the year. Melissa had quietly cashed out her RRSP, the full amount, paid the withholding tax, all of it, and it still wasn't enough. They were not coming to check on me. They were coming for the house, for the 2 acres, for whatever they thought they could get their hands on before the bank got to Derek first. My house is not worth a fortune by Toronto standards, but in Collingwood, on the escarpment, it is worth just over $1.5 million. To a man drowning in $400,000 of debt, $1.5 million looks like a lifeline. I called my lawyer, Paul Mercer, the same afternoon I got Frances's report. Paul has been my lawyer for 22 years. He is not a warm man. He is a precise man, which is what I needed. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Okay, Robert, here's what we're going to do. The power of attorney form Melissa had slid across the table in October was the first move. My refusal, polite, vague, let me read it, let me think about it, bought me the time I needed. I had already transferred every meaningful asset I owned into a family trust 2 years earlier. The week after Carol's funeral, When I was sitting alone in this house, realizing exactly how exposed a man my age can be. The trust is structured so that not even I can easily access its core assets without triggering documentation that would take months to unwind. The house sits inside it. The investments sit inside it. The account Melissa and Derek knew about, the one I'd had since before she was born, held a balance of about $40,000. That was their target. That was the decoy. Paul said, "They'll make a move at the holidays. People always do. The emotion covers the mechanics." He was right. Melissa called in early November to say she and Derek would be hosting Thanksgiving this year. But, and there was a careful pause, "we thought maybe it would be nicer at your place, Dad. Your house is so much bigger. We could really do it properly there." I said that sounded wonderful. "And Derek's parents are in town. Is it all right if they join?" "Just the family." There it was. Derek's parents. Tom and Beverly Pouliot, who I had met 4 times in 12 years, who were, according to Francis's most recent note, currently staying with Melissa and Derek because their own condo in Barrie had been quietly listed for sale to service one of Derek's guarantee calls. "Of course," I said, "the more the merrier. Tell them to come hungry." I spent the week before Thanksgiving the way I have spent every important week of my professional life, preparing. I called the security company I'd used during sensitive OSC investigations. 3 cameras installed in the main living area, the dining room, and my home office. Small, professional, not the blinking light consumer nonsense. Audio running to an encrypted cloud server that Paul's paralegal could access from her phone in Barrie. I wore a small digital recorder in the chest pocket of my flannel shirt, the kind you can buy at any Staples, the kind that sounds like it costs 10 times what it does. I cooked the turkey myself. The same brine Carol used. 24 hours in salt water and maple syrup and bay leaves. The house smelled like every good Thanksgiving we had ever had. I wanted it to. I wanted them comfortable. Comfortable people get sloppy. They arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Melissa first, with Derek behind her carrying wine he definitely couldn't afford. Tom and Beverly Pouliot came in after. The way people come into a house they are already calculating. Tom's eyes went to the ceiling height immediately. Beverly touched the kitchen countertop with 2 fingers the way a contractor does when they're estimating replacement costs. "Robert," Tom said, shaking my hand with both of his. What a place. What a place you've got here." "Thank you," I said. 40 years in the making." "It's a lot of house for one person," Beverly said. She was already looking down the hallway toward the bedrooms. "It must be a lot of upkeep." "Oh, I manage," I said. Melissa hugged me. Held on a second longer than usual. The way you hold on to something you're about to ask for. We sat down to eat at 4. I watched the table the way I used to watch a deposition. Not the words, but the pauses. Who looked at whom before they spoke? Who touched whom on the arm when someone else said something that had gone too far? Derek poured the wine. He poured mine first, which I noticed. He refilled it without being asked, which I also noticed. The conversation started with the house, the way it always does when someone wants something inside it. "Did you ever think about downsizing, Dad?" Melissa said during a lull after the main course. Casual. Fork still in hand. I read that a lot of people your age find it liberating. Move into something easier to manage. "Where would I put Carol's garden?" I said. Short pause. "You could take some of the plants. A condo on the water might have a balcony." "I'm fine here," I said. "I like it here." Derek cleared his throat. He set down his fork. I saw Melissa's hand find his knee under the table. The signal. The go-ahead. I looked at my plate and waited. "Robert," Derek said, "I want to be straight with you because I respect you." I kept my face open and mild. "I appreciate that, Derek. We're going through a tough stretch. You probably know some of it. The market, rates, the whole thing. We're gonna be fine, but there's a crunch right now. A real crunch." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "The thing is," he said, and now he reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but near it. That deliberate near touch of a man asking for money. "We've been thinking. This house, this property, it's incredible. It's worth a serious amount right now. The Collingwood market, and it's just you here. You don't need all of it. If you were open to some kind of arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" I asked. Still mild, still pleasant. Melissa jumped in. The handoff, smooth, practiced. Dad, we were thinking that if you signed the property over to us, or into a joint ownership, we could refinance against it. Pull out enough to clear Derek's situation, and then we'd have the house eventually anyway, when you... She stopped. When you die. She had the grace not to finish it. We'd take care of everything, she said instead. The upkeep, the taxes, everything. And you'd still live here. Nothing would change for you. Everything would change for me. Everything. I would be a tenant in my own house. A dependent in the home I built. That is what she was describing. And once the property was in their names and Derek's creditors had taken what they needed, there would be nothing left. Not for Carol's foundation. Not for anything. I had seen this exact structure in fraud investigations 4 times in my career. It is called an equity stripping scheme when strangers do it to seniors. When your daughter does it, it doesn't have a clean name. Tom Pulio spoke up from the far end of the table. He'd been waiting, I realized. This was the closing argument. We're all family here, Robert. What's the point of having something if it doesn't help the people you love when they need it most? Beverly and I, we never had this kind of equity to pass on. You have a chance to do something real for Melissa. And for your grandchildren someday, Beverly added. Soft practiced. I didn't have grandchildren. Melissa and Derek had been saying someday for 7 years. I looked around that table, at my daughter, at the man she had married, at his parents who were living in her house because their own had been sold to cover his mistakes, and I felt the full shape of what they were doing. Not in anger. Not even in sadness, quite yet. In the cold, flat clarity that used to come over me before a major evidence review, all the pieces in place. Pattern confirmed. I folded my napkin. I set it beside my plate. I looked at Melissa. I appreciate you being honest with me, I said. I need to think about it. Derek's face relaxed. Melissa's shoulders dropped an inch. Tom reached over and poured himself more wine. They thought I was softening. They thought the old man was going to cave. Take your time, Dad, Melissa said, and reached across to squeeze my hand. I will, I said. And then I said, I'm just going to get the pie. And I went to the kitchen. And I stood at the counter for a moment with my back to them, and I allowed myself exactly 10 seconds of grief. For the daughter I had raised. For the phone calls that were really audits. For the hand squeeze that was a transaction. Then I cut the pie and brought it out. And we finished Thanksgiving dinner. And they left at 9 with 2 bottles of wine they hadn't paid for, and a certainty that they had nearly closed the deal. That night I called Paul. They asked, I said. I figured it would be today, he said. How direct? Direct enough. They want me to sign over the property into joint ownership so Derek can refinance against it. Paul made a sound that wasn't quite a word. How did you leave it? I told them I needed to think. Good. That's perfect. Now we wait. He paused. They're going to get impatient, Robert. When Derek's loan guarantee comes due, they're going to stop asking nicely. I know, I said. You sure you want to do this the long way? I thought about Carol's name on the side of the trust. I thought about the apple trees she and I had planted when we were young enough that a shovel felt light. I thought about Tom Pouliot running his hand over my kitchen counter like it was already his. I'm sure, I said. 2 weeks later, Melissa called to ask if I'd thought about it. I said I was still thinking, that it was a big decision, that I wasn't sure I understood all the implications. I let my voice sound a little vague, a little foggy. She immediately became warm and helpful, offering to come over and walk me through it. And I said yes, that would be lovely, and I made her tea when she came, and I asked questions that were slightly the wrong questions, and I watched her become more and more confident that her father was a man who needed to be managed. She left a copy of the power of attorney form on the counter. No pressure, Dad. Just read it when you're ready. I put it in the shredder after her car left the driveway. The moment everything accelerated was a Saturday in late November. Francis called me in the morning. Derek's largest loan guarantee, $275,000 to a private lender out of Mississauga, had been formally called. They had 30 days. December 22nd, Francis said the lender was not a patient organization. I called Paul immediately. Move to the next phase, I said. You sure? 30 days, I said. Okay, he said. I'll have everything positioned by Monday. That Monday, I went into my bank in Collingwood and had a conversation with the branch manager I had known for 15 years. I moved $35,000 out of the account Melissa and Derek knew about, leaving just under $5,000, enough to look like a normal operating balance to anyone who called in asking about my finances. The assets inside the trust were already beyond reach. The house was already beyond reach. They just didn't know it yet. I did not change the locks. I want to be clear about that. I did not change the locks because I needed them to come inside. Melissa called on a Tuesday evening, 3 days after what I would later find out was a very difficult conversation with Derek's lender. Her voice had a new quality in it, something tighter and quicker, the way a person's voice gets when the politeness is no longer strategic, but effortful. Dad, we need to talk about the paperwork. We're running out of time to make this work before the end of the year. Tax implications and everything. Of course, I said. Why don't you both come for dinner this week? I'll make that pasta you like. She said yes. She said Friday? She said she thought Derek's parents might join as well, that they'd been going through a hard time, that she hoped that was okay. I said, of course. I said the more the merrier, the same words I'd used in October. Friday evening. The cameras were running. The recorder was in my shirt pocket. I made pasta because I had said I would, because I am a man who does what he says he will do, and I served it with bread and a salad, and opened a bottle of white wine that Carol and I had bought on a trip to Prince Edward County, years before we knew there was anything worth saving it for. Tom Pulio looked at the wine label and said, "Oh, Clausen Chase. Not bad. Not bad." It was a bottle I had been keeping for 11 years. We ate. The conversation was surface level for the first hour, and then Derek said he needed to use the washroom, and he was gone for almost 6 minutes. And when I checked the camera footage later, those 6 minutes showed him standing in my home office doorway, looking at the filing cabinet against the wall. He didn't touch anything, but he looked. After dessert, Melissa put her hand flat on the table. The signal. The conversation shifted. Dad, we have to do this now. Derek's situation. It can't wait anymore. She looked at me with what I believe was genuine desperation. I do not think she set out to be this person. I think she married a man who kept bigger and bigger secrets, and by the time she understood the size of them, she was already in too deep to see any other exit. That is not an excuse. It is an explanation, and there is a difference. I understand there's urgency, I said. There is, Derek said. He had a document in his hand, not the power of attorney this time, a property transfer agreement, drafted by someone. Paul later identified the lawyer as a notary in Innisfil, who had a history of cutting corners on due diligence. If you sign this tonight, we can file before the end of the month. The house transfers to joint tenancy. You retain full right to live here. Nothing changes for you, Robert. We handle everything. I see, I said. It's the best thing for everyone, Tom said. He was leaning forward, elbows on Carol's table. It really is, Dad, Melissa said. You can trust us. I picked up the document. I read the first page with the appropriate speed of a man who was not reading carefully enough, and on the second page I paused, and I said, I don't understand this section here. Pointing to a clause I understood perfectly, and Derek leaned over to explain it. And as he was explaining it, I said, Can I have a pen? And Melissa reached into her bag immediately. Immediately she had one ready, and I took it from her and I held it over the signature line, and I looked up. I'm not going to sign this, I said. The temperature in the room changed. Dad, I'm not going to sign it, I said again. No wobble, no apology. This property is not mine to transfer. It hasn't been mine to transfer for 2 years. It is held in an irrevocable trust that I established after your mother died, and signing this document would constitute fraud, which I imagine none of you want. Derek stared at me. The document was still on the table between us. What trust? He said. You never mentioned the trust. I don't discuss my estate planning at the dinner table, I said. But it exists, and it is airtight, and I would encourage you to speak to a lawyer before you explore this any further. Melissa was very still. You're bluffing, she said quietly. I'm not. You're a confused old man who doesn't understand his own documents, Derek said. His voice had dropped into something colder, something that he usually kept away from me. "You've been forgetting things. Melissa has been worried. We can get a doctor to confirm that you're not competent to be making these decisions on your own." There it was, 60 seconds from a business conversation to a declaration that I was incompetent. That was how thin the concern for my well-being actually was. "That is a serious thing to say," I told him. "It's a serious situation," he said. Melissa was looking at the table. She wasn't contradicting him. She was not going to contradict him. She had made her choice, or it had been made for her, slowly, over years, and now, here we were. I stood up. I began clearing the plates. "I think dinner is over," I said. Derek stood up too. He was a large man, taller than me, broader. He stepped around the table and stood between me and the kitchen door. "We're not done," he said. "Derek," Melissa said, a warning in her voice. "We are not leaving without something," he said. Not to her. To me. "I think you should step aside," I said. He didn't move. He put his hand on my arm. Not hard. Not yet. But with the specific weight of a man who wants you to understand that harder is available. "You're going to make this right," he said. "You owe this to Melissa. You owe this to your family." I looked at his hand on my arm. I looked at his face. I thought about 32 years of watching people believe that they were smarter than the evidence. "Let go of my arm," I said. He didn't. What happened in the next 2 seconds I will describe plainly because it matters. I pulled my arm back. Derek, who had been leaning his weight into the grip, stumbled forward. His other hand caught the edge of the table, the wineglass. Carol's wineglass, from the set we had bought in Niagara-on-the-Lake on her 20th anniversary, tipped and fell and broke on the hardwood floor. A shard caught the back of my hand as I stepped back, a clean cut, not deep, but immediate and bleeding and very visible in the light over the dining room table. There was a moment of absolute silence. Beverly made a small sound. Tom was on his feet. Derek looked at my hand. He looked at his own hands. He looked at Melissa. "It was an accident," he said immediately. "He pulled away, it was." "I know what it was," I said. I picked up the kitchen cloth from the counter. I pressed it against my hand. I looked at all 4 of them, one at a time. Tom and Beverly by the window, side by side, saying nothing, doing nothing. Melissa with her hands over her mouth. Derek with the blank-eyed look of a man recalculating. "I'm going to drive to the hospital," I said. My voice was the same. "I'll need this looked at." I took my car keys from the hook by the door. "Please don't be here when I get back." "Dad," Melissa said. "Dad, please," it was. "Don't be here when I get back," I said. The emergency department at Collingwood General was quiet for a Friday night. The triage nurse was efficient and kind. When she asked what happened, I told her plainly. There had been a physical altercation in my home with my son-in-law. I had been cut by broken glass, and I wanted it on record. I gave her Derek's full name. I gave her the address. She made a call before she even brought me into the bay. The attending physician, a tired, careful woman named Dr. Okafor, cleaned the wound and determined that needed 4 stitches. Before she touched it, I asked her to photograph the cut, to photograph the glass fragment that had come with me in the cloth. I had wrapped it without thinking, the professional instinct of a man who has spent his life preserving evidence, and to note in the record that the injury was consistent with the laceration from broken glassware under physical circumstances. She looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "You've done this before." "Not from this side," I said. I sat under the fluorescent lights with 4 stitches in my hand, and I took out my phone and I typed 3 words to Paul Mercer. The doors open. His response came in 40 seconds. On my way. "Don't go back inside until I'm there." I had not planned to. I was not going back inside alone. In the weeks leading up to that evening, Paul and I had made a number of preparations. I had not changed the locks. I had left the property transfer document on the dining room table, where Derek had placed it. I had left my old laptop in the home office, open, with a spreadsheet visible on screen that contained account numbers Paul had generated specifically, a convincing decoy, numbers that resolved to closed or dormant accounts, but which looked real enough to someone in a hurry. I had also had a conversation in September with a detective I know through the OSC, a man named Sergeant Aldous Ferreira, currently with the OPP. I had sent him Francis's report and a cover letter outlining the situation. He had read it, and he had said carefully that if something documentable occurred, he would be interested. He had also said in the same careful tone that the right thing was to let it happen on its own, not to engineer it. I had agreed. I was not engineering anything. I was watching. Paul arrived at the hospital at 9:30. He looked at my stitches and didn't say anything about them, which is one of the things I appreciate about Paul. He said, "The cameras are still running?" "Yes." "And the audio?" I patted my shirt pocket. "Everything from dinner." "Let's go," he said. We pulled onto my road at 10:15. The house was dark from the front. Paul parked 2 houses down. We sat in his car with a tablet on the center console, and I opened the security feed. The front of the house was empty. No cars in the driveway. I thought perhaps they had listened. Then I switched to the backyard camera. Derek and Tom were at the back door. Derek had something in his hand. A key. Melissa's key. The spare I had given her 3 years ago when Carol was sick and she was coming to help. I watched them go in. I won't describe exactly what they did inside in the order I watched it, because the order matters to what came next, and I want it to be precise. What I will say is that they spent 40 minutes in my house. They went to the office first. Derek, and then Tom as well. They went through the filing cabinet. They found the decoy spreadsheet. Derek photographed it with his phone. They went to the bedroom, Carol's side of the closet specifically, where I had kept her jewelry in a cedar box on the shelf. Beverly opened it. She took out a pearl pendant that Carol's mother had given her. She put it in her coat pocket. I watched it happen in high definition, and I did not look away, because I owed it to Carol to be a witness. Even to this. Melissa stayed in the kitchen the entire time. She did not look for anything. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. I do not know what she was thinking. I have thought about it many times since. At one point, Derek went to the wall safe in the office. There is no wall safe, but I had put a small decorative panel on that wall years ago for an unrelated reason, and it apparently looked like one, and he pressed his hands against it and said something to Tom I couldn't quite catch. At 10:53, Paul received a text from Sergeant Ferreira. The officers were 2 minutes out. "That's our cue," Paul said. We got out of the car. We walked to the front door. Paul had his briefcase. I had the tablet under my arm, still running the live feed. The front door opened with my key, and we stepped into the dark front hall. And from the back of the house, I heard Derek say, "Someone's here." And then there was the sound of the rear door being fumbled with, and then a sharp knock at the back. The 2 officers, Constable Park and Constable Deere, and a voice that carries in a quiet way, "OPP, please come to the front of the house." I turned on the hall light. They came from 2 directions. Derek and Tom from the hallway, Melissa from the kitchen, Beverly behind her. They stepped into the lit entrance hall and saw me standing there with Paul at my shoulder, and I watched something drain out of Derek's face, the same thing I have watched drain out of faces in interview rooms over 30 years. The calculation stopping. The machine going quiet. "Hi, Dad," Melissa said. Her voice was very small. "Melissa," I said. Constable Park came through from the back. She looked at me. "Mr. Hale?" "Yes." She looked at the 4 of them. "We received a report of an unauthorized entry." "Is this your residence, sir?" "It is." "Did you give these individuals permission to be here tonight?" "I did not." Derek stirred talking. He was good at it. He talked well under pressure. He said it was a family matter, that Melissa had a key, that they were concerned about my welfare, that I had been acting erratically and they were checking on me. Constable Dare wrote it down with an expression that gave nothing away. Paul set his briefcase on the hall table and opened it. He placed 3 documents on top, side by side, the way you lay out evidence at a deposition. The trust document, Francis's report, which he had held in escrow for exactly this purpose, and a 2-page letter from the OSC's legal archive confirming my 32 years of service and full cognitive certification for my last employment medical, 18 months prior. My client, Paul said, is not erratic. He is not confused. He is a retired forensic accountant with 3 decades of professional experience, and he has been building a documented case against these 4 individuals for the better part of a year. He looked at Constable Park. I believe you'll find that the woman in the beige coat is in possession of a piece of jewelry that belongs to this house. A pearl pendant. I'd ask you to check before they leave. Beverly's hand went to her coat pocket. It was involuntary. She couldn't help it. Constable Park looked at her. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to empty your pockets. I don't need to describe every minute of what came after. The pearl pendant was in Beverly's pocket. The photographs Derek had taken of the decoy spreadsheet were on his phone, and he had also, it turned out, photographed 2 pages of Paul's trust document that I had left visible on the desk, an additional count. Tom had taken a silver cufflink set from the dresser in the bedroom. These are small things in themselves, but they were committed in a house these 4 individuals had entered without permission, after a dinner that had been recorded in full, after an incident that was on file at Collingwood General with 4 stitches and Dr. Okafor's notation. Sergeant Ferreira arrived at 11:30. He had been waiting, he told me later, in a Tim Hortons on Highway 26. He had a coffee. He said he figured it would take about an hour. Derek and Tom were charged that night with breaking and entering and theft under $5,000. Beverly was charged with theft. Melissa was not charged because she had not taken anything and had not entered any part of the house beyond the kitchen where she stood, and because I asked Constable Park not to. I want to say that carefully. I asked them not to. It was not mercy exactly. It was recognition. She was the least culpable person in that hallway, and she was also the one who was going to have to live with all of it. The charges against Derek expanded in the weeks that followed. Frances's report, filed formally through Paul, provided the basis for a civil fraud investigation into the attempted property transfer. The lender out of Mississauga presented with evidence that Derek had been planning to transfer encumbered property under false pretenses, pursued their own complaint. It became, as these things do, a knot that took a long time to untangle. Derek pleaded guilty to the break and enter and received a conditional sentence, 18 months to be served in the community, with conditions. The fraud investigation resulted in a separate civil judgment. He lost his real estate license in February. Tom and Beverly received fines and probation. I have not seen Derek since the night in the hallway. I do not expect to. Melissa called me from her own mother, Derek's mother, the first place she had to go on the Monday after. She did not cry. She said she was sorry. She said she had known it was wrong, and had told herself it wasn't. She said she didn't know how to explain the last 2 years of her life. I told her she didn't have to explain them that night. I told her I loved her. I told her that love and consequences existed at the same time, and that understanding that was how you got through the rest of your life. She came to the house in the spring, in April, when the snow was off the escarpment and the apple trees were starting. She stood in Carol's garden for a long time without saying anything. I brought her tea and sat beside her, and we were both quiet for a while, which was more honest than anything we had said to each other in a year. She is rebuilding her life. It is hard, and it is real, and it is hers. I think Carol would have found a way to see the good in that. I am working on it. The trust stands. The house stands. The apple trees are full this year, more than I can use, same as always. Last October, I made cider for the first time since Carol died. I borrowed the press from a neighbor and stood in the side yard for a whole afternoon and worked until my hands were sore and the light was going. And I filled 12 bottles and lined them up on the kitchen counter. And they looked, in that particular late October light, like something worth protecting. I have been contacted 3 times in the past year by people who heard about my situation through the network that Francis and Paul and I have quietly built. An 81-year-old man in Sudbury whose nephew was trying to have him declared incapable so he could access a farm that had been in the family for 4 generations. A 74-year-old woman in Kingston whose son had her signed document she didn't understand while her husband was in palliative care. A retired teacher in Hamilton who had been giving money to her daughter for years, each amount just small enough to feel like kindness, until it wasn't. I am not a lawyer. I am not running a charity. But I know how these patterns work, And I know that most people facing them believe they are alone in facing them. And that is the specific cruelty of it, that the people doing it are counting on exactly that isolation. I do what I can. I ask Paul for help when I need it. Francis takes the calls that require more than I can give. I put the cider in the cellar at the end of October, where it will be cold through the winter. In the spring, it will be ready. I will open the first bottle in Carol's garden. On the wooden bench we built the year Melissa was born. On the afternoon, when the escarpment is clear and the light comes across the apple trees, the way it does when it's finally warm again. And I will sit with it for a while, and I will think about the things that hold and the things that don't, and how sometimes you only know the difference after everything has been tested. I am 67 years old. I have worked hard, I have paid my taxes, and I built a life in this house with a woman I loved for 39 years. No one is going to take that from me, not without a fight so quiet and so thorough that by the time they understand what's happened, it's already over. I still think about the moment Melissa stood at Carol's kitchen window while the others went through the house. She didn't take anything. She just stood there looking out at the backyard, at the apple trees her mother had planted. And I've turned that image over in my mind more times than I can count. She knew it was wrong. She had known for a long time. And she stood there anyway. That is the part that doesn't resolve cleanly, the part that doesn't fit into any satisfying story about justice served and lessons learned. What I've come to understand, slowly, is that what happened in my house wasn't really about money. Money was the mechanism. The thing underneath it was a slow erosion of honesty. In Derek, first, then in Melissa as she accommodated his secrets, then in Tom and Beverly, who had spent decades treating other people's stability as a resource to be drawn down. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to commit fraud against their family. It builds. Small compromises, small mice and ice, small moments where the easier thing is to look away from what you know is true. And then one Thanksgiving, you find yourself sliding a property transfer form across a table to your 67-year-old father, and somewhere inside you, a part of you knows exactly what you're doing. I don't say this to excuse any of it. I say it because understanding how it happens is the only thing that actually protects you from it. I spent 32 years watching financial crimes unfold, and the single thread running through every case was this. The people who got taken were not stupid. They were trusting. They believed that love was a kind of armor, that family meant safety, that the person across the table wouldn't do what the evidence said they were going to do. I almost fell into the same trap, not because I didn't see it coming, but because there's a part of you that hopes you're wrong about your own child. Being right about Melissa was the worst thing I've ever been right about. What I held on to, through all of it, was the clarity that comes from knowing your own values and not drifting from them under pressure. I did not lie. I did not manipulate. I built a trap, yes, but it was built from truth, real documents, real recordings, real evidence of real actions. I gave them every opportunity to stop. I gave Melissa space right up until the end to be the person I raised her to be. That is not weakness. That is the hardest kind of strength there is. The kind that doesn't announce itself. And that is what I would say to anyone watching this who recognizes something of their own life in mine. Not that you need to be clever enough to outsmart the people coming for you, though it helps, but that you need to be honest enough with yourself to see them clearly and steady enough in your own sense of right and wrong that fear doesn't make you agree to things you shouldn't. Your integrity is not a negotiating position. It is the thing that makes everything else possible. The cider from last October is ready now. I opened the first bottle on the bench in Carol's garden on a Saturday in April when the light was coming through the apple trees just right. It tasted like work and patience and time. It tasted like something that held. That's what I'm still learning to be.